Hello, people. Andrew here, talking about comics from a reader, collector, speculator, investor point of view. And today I'm talking about, in that order of importance, and today I'm talking about Supreme Power. The follow up series to that was called Squadron Supreme. The Squadron Supreme originally showed up in the early 70s in the Avengers books, and it was a bunch of characters that were modeled after DC's Justice League of America. Hyperion stood in for Superman, Nighthawk for Batman, etc. Now we're jumping up into the year 2000, and the Squadron Supreme is reimagined on a sort of a different reality. It's a darker take on these characters from the Squadron Supreme. We still have a Hyperion, we still have a Nighthawk, so they're still modeled after the DC universe, but it's a darker tone to the whole exploration of this. So I enjoyed Supreme Power, and it ends off with Mark Milton, who is Hyperion, basically declaring to the American military, American government that, hey, don't come looking for me, don't bother me, leave me alone, or there will be consequences. And that's where we left off. We begin this one, and right away I'm looking at it and I'm starting reading, well, Mark Milton's back in the fold. How did he get there? And there are 4 new members on the team. Emil Burbank, the smartest man in the world. Arcana, which is sort of the Zatanna type of character. She's into the magic situation. A new character called The Shape, who is a lot like the Blob from the X-Men. And a character named Nuke, who I imagine is based somewhat really loosely on Firestorm. He doesn't have the same shape-changing powers. He's more of an explosive character, and if he's outside of his containment suit, he will leak radiation and kill all of those around him. Very different than Firestorm. So Mark Milton's back in the fold. There's these 4 new characters. How did this happen? It is answered, but not in this particular series, and I'll get to that. So I'm just coming in straight in after reading the Supreme Power. I go into Squadron Supreme because it's a follow-up. I see all of this, and I say, well, what's going on? I don't know how this all happened. And you know what? It didn't matter at that time. It just, okay, I can, for whatever reason, Mark Milton's back in the fold. These new guys, let's go on from there. And we do. And it's written by J. Michael Straczynski and it's illustrated by Gary Frank. And it's the high quality from both of those creatives that I read for the 7 issues. And I'm really enjoying the 7 issues. They make a tour to Africa where they run into a number of different African powers that were also created when the ship came into orbit, with the added notion that some of these characters from Africa, they say, you know what, just get out of our country. We're not asking for your assistance. We can take care of our own problems. Which starts, specifically Stanley, who's the Blur, thinking about, what exactly are we doing as this particular group. It goes on to run into a character called Michael Redstone, who was in Supreme Power, very powerful, and at the same sort of levels of Hyperion, and we're all set for a rematch come issue number 7. We've collected the group together to face off against him. And then it ends. I mean, it just ends. There is no issue number 8. It stops at 7. The battleground has been set, but a punch hasn't even been thrown yet. We have no idea of the resolution of this particular battle. We have no resolution about any of the characters or any of the repercussions of some of the things that they've done during the 7 issues. It just stops dead. And I'm thinking, why? Well, what happened? So I started to look around and read some information, some articles, and I don't think that I've got a clear picture. One article indicated that J. Michael Straczynski had some problems with the editors and that they wanted certain things, and he said, if I can't have complete creative control, I don't want to write this book anymore, and he just walked away from it. I don't know if that's a truth, and I'm not going to, slander somebody because of that, but that's as close as I got to finding out something. But then it is, the next question is, okay, so J. Michael Straczynski leaves the book. Why would Marvel not hire another writer to complete the storyline? They've done that in the past, just to wrap things up and to bring some sense of closure to it, but they didn't. They just left it alone, and it ends after issue 7 without a complete story. So, is it worth the read if it's not a complete story? And my answer is yes. I'm going to go through some of these covers because, why not? I enjoyed the 7 issues written by J. Michael Straczynski. I enjoyed the interactions with some of these new characters, especially Arcana, The Shape, and Emil Burbank. They had some funny moments going on there. I liked the development that was happening between the consciousness of the ship, which was locked in Joe Ledger's crystal on his hand, with Zarda. I liked the development of the character Inertia and her backstory and how Zarda really favored the way that she handled situations. I liked the questions that Stanley was asking. Even Nighthawk, who's barely in it. As I say, he's barely in it because it's more focused on that. That's Inertia. He shows up at the end because he's going to take part in this battle with Redstone because he was there for the first battle as well. But again, we don't get anywhere beyond that. But I enjoyed enough of this series, the way that it was written, the way that it was illustrated, that I enjoyed reading each one of those issues. And even though it doesn't come to a definite conclusion, it's worth the read. Now, it's worth the read if you've been reading Supreme Power and you like that. If you were coming in blank and just said, "Oh, this is a Squadron Supreme book. Let me start off at issue number 1. I'll read these 7 issues." You would be lost a great deal. There's a lot of information and dialogue and situations that harken back to Supreme Power without putting too much information there on the page about what happened in the past. You just have to have it's somewhat assumed that you've read that. So if you're just coming in blind, I don't know that it would be a good read. But if you've been reading Supreme Power, and as I say, even though it doesn't come to a definite conclusion, it is worth the read. As far as, that's a nice cover, by the way. As far as anything about the collecting spec and investment on any of these books, pretty much no. But for collecting, it's for Supreme Power or for Squadron Supreme type of material. And some people might like the J. Michael Straczynski, and some of the covers I'm going to show you. There's Dale Keown, there's Mark Diodato. Some people might like the Gary Frank stuff, and that would fit into the collection stuff. But really, it's a good read if you like the Supreme Power. You will like the Squadron Supreme, and you'll maybe be disappointed that it ends after issue number 7. But that's not all that was going on during this time. So this comes to an end. But during this period of time when Supreme Power and Squadron Supreme were being written and released, there were 3 miniseries. And each miniseries focused on one particular character from the Squadron. There was Dr. Spectrum, Hyperion, and Nighthawk. So, starting off with Dr. Spectrum. This was written between 2004 and 2005 and ran for 6 issues, written by Sarah Barnes and illustrated by Travel Foreman. Two creatives I really don't know. Dale Keown provided the covers for 1 through 3 and for issue 5, and Gary Frank did 4 and 6. So what is this particular about? Well, in the first volume of Supreme Power, Colonel Ledger is trying out the crystal on his hand, and he's trying to get a feel for how it works, and it sends him into a coma. And that happens in the book itself, Supreme Power. We watch him go through a coma, and then he finally breaks out of it. This is the story of what was going on while he was in that coma. And why do I say that is because the crystal on his hand is talking to him and trying to get to know him better. He wants to know all of his secrets in his life that made him who he is. So it's really a big character study about Joe Ledger. And, it was a fine character study, and the artwork was fine. It was nothing spectacular on any front. I felt maybe it went on a little bit too long. It was 6 issues long, and I think 4 issues would have probably done the trick. And it's just a character backstory, about why Joe Ledger joined the military and, his home life early when he was a kid and all that sort of stuff. And it's fine as a character study, but I think it was really a missed opportunity because, there's people all over. It's not like he had anything special about him. This is just his life, and this is what motivated him to join the military and how he got there. But the crystal, the ship that came in from some alien planet and has its own designs, we know so very little about it. This is an opportunity to teach us more about the crystal, about the homeland, its objectives, where it came from, why it's here. But we don't get any of that. We just get the story of a guy, and before he put on the crystal, he's just, a guy without any powers, and why he joined the military and why he's the way that he is. So yeah, it's an interesting enough discussion that way, but there's nothing really new about the storyline about Supreme Power, about this crystal. Part of it, and this is in the Supreme Power, they tried to cut off his hand because the crystal, they wanted to have access to the crystal, and they said, well, if we can't wake up Joe Ledger, we need to have that crystal, let's just cut off his hand. And this is reference to that, and the fact that the crystal reacted violently to it and destroyed the people that tried to do that. So the elements that happen within Supreme Power are referenced here, but there's really nothing too much added. We get some of the bit about the doctor who's involved in this case, is concerned about Joe Ledger and this and that, but really it doesn't really add anything to the story, and it's kind of unnecessary. I mean, it's just telling a story, so telling a story is not ever really unnecessary, but to further the history or the knowledge of the crystal or any of the things happening around Supreme Power, it really doesn't do that. We're just going to learn a little bit about Joe Ledger, why he's the way he is, and we're really not going to learn anything further about the crystal or why it's here. It's just a character backstory and some other characters floating around. It was fine to read and fine artwork, but it's really not necessary for the Supreme Power line. And there are, it's an okay story on its own. If you're just going to pick it up on its own, it would be an all right story, but it's not something that I would recommend. And if you're into the Supreme Power and you just want to know a little bit more, again, it only gives you information about Joe Ledger and his backstory. It really doesn't further the plot anymore about Supreme Power. Hyperion was a 5-issue series, and it was written by J. Michael Straczynski and illustrated by Dan Jurgens, and it was in 2005. This is the bridge issue between Supreme Power and Squadron Supreme. This is the series that tells you why Hyperion's back into the fold and introduces those 4 characters, Emil Burbank, Arcana, The Shape, and Nuke. This is the first issue that introduces those 4 characters. And in this issue, all 4 characters are given a little bit of a backstory about how they got here and how they got their power. They did 4 characters in 1 issue as opposed to 1 character in 6 issues. So this would be, if any of them are to be a collector or even considered a spec, and I wouldn't, it would be this one because these 4 characters are first introduced. So what is the story about? Well, they're sent on the mission to bring Mark Milton back into the fold, so they go to the Arctic to corral him and bring him back. Some nice covers. This is the Mike Deodato cover, I think. So they're sent to the Arctic to bring him back, and things happen, with the magic of Arcana, bending certain realities and things like that, and the power of Hyperion and the crystal itself. They end up getting sent to possibly an alternate reality, and in this alternate reality, Hyperion has started to take over the world, and we're in the midst of this world takeover when the superheroes have all aligned on his side. And as I say, they're taking over the world. It's sort of like a what-if situation, because by the time they get back into the... Arcana says, well, that was just a possibility, but because we folded everything back into this reality, that possibility ceases to exist. But Emil Burbank has a clue that says, no, this is actually, we didn't go into a different reality, we went into the future, and this is something that's going to happen. It's like a what-if type of story. What I found was kind of shallow about this is that it didn't go far enough. It didn't go far enough to tell me about the taking over of the world. Some of the elements involved, and I wasn't crazy about the idea that that Hyperion had to brainwash these heroes to join his side. And again, maybe it's just me harkening back to the older, Squadron Supreme by Mark Grunwald, but it was more of a dialogue and a discussion. And the heroes that sided with the Hyperion of that time said, "Yeah, you know what? We should. We should take over the world. We have the power to do so." And it was, a conscious decision. It wasn't a brainwashed decision to do this. But so if that's the way we're going to go, how did that all pan out? And if he's going to brainwash, the heroes to align with him, why not brainwash world leaders and they have their military capabilities and brainwash them to be on your side and fight for you? So, it just, I wasn't quite on board with that concept, and it's very short. There's it's a 5-issue series, and the first issue is an introduction, and then there's all this blibbity blab and about the future possibility, the brainwash, this massive machine. Again, we don't get a lot of information about the ship and its intentions. Just Hyperion's intentions, and I felt it was kind of the artwork by Dan Jurgens was fine. It just I don't know. I don't think it's his best work, and I'm not going to say that he rushed it, but it didn't have a lot of detail and a lot of character to it. So, as a standalone 5-issue, I know nothing about Supreme Power or Squadron Supreme. Is it worth a read? No, absolutely not, because you would be so lost as to what's going on in here. So is it worth the read if you are a Supreme, reading the Supreme Power? It's good because it does bridge between the two. It introduces those 4 characters and it lets you know how they corralled Mark Milton back into the fold. And then finally we get Nighthawk gets his own 6-issue series, and this one was written by Daniel Way and illustrated by Steve Dillon. I will say right off that I like Steve Dillon. Out of the artists that were shown here, I think Steve Dillon is the best. I think Gary Frank is a really good artist, but I think as far as these individuals' stories are concerned, Steve Dillon, and I like Steve Dillon's work. I've liked it since the Punisher. He has a very clean and almost simple line, but it's very expressive when it comes down to the faces and what have you. So I do like Steve Dillon's work. Daniel Way I didn't know anything about, but apparently he's written a lot of Wolverine, Deadpool, Venom. Again, these are not books that I read, so I don't know who Daniel Way was, and I read this story here. Okay, so Nighthawk, I like Nighthawk. There's enough difference about Nighthawk than there is from Batman to make him his own character. Sure, he's modeled out. He's a rich guy. He gets into his suit at night. He goes after crime, but he's a lot more violent. He's not as morally ambiguous type of thing as Batman. He doesn't mind, breaking bones and killing if it's necessary. He sees worlds as villains very black and white, and he's not willing to give somebody a second chance on a certain situation or just corral them and put them into a jail or an asylum so that they can break free. No. If you're really that bad, you're done with. I'm not wasting my time chasing the same guy over and over again. You're done. I like this character. I like his slightly harder edge. I still like Batman too. So I'm looking forward to reading this thing about Nighthawk. And he comes into a situation where so some of these covers, I did like all of these covers too. So they were good. I just want to go right to number 3 because then we'll see this character. He's got really no name, Fabo the Clown, but that's not really who he is. So we'll just call him Clown. So, Nighthawk is based on, Batman. So it stands to reason that they're going to create a villain that's, counter to the Joker. Because Batman and Joker, it's the, team sort of thing. But this is really not a Joker at all. Sure, he's a mass murderer through poisoned chemicals. He started off as a pharmacist that was giving out poison tablets to people and killed a whole bunch of people. He was sent to prison. He was beaten and scarred in prison, and then he was sent to an insane asylum, and he's been locked away for over 10 years, and he's in a catatonic state. And then, for whatever reason, he gets an opportunity to break out of this asylum and then start a killing rampage because what I found really a little awkward about this character is that really, if Batman was on the scene, this guy would have been incarcerated, would have all of his deeds would have been done. He would be finished with by the third issue. There's just so many problems with his escape and what have you, and his character. I mean, he's a serial killer who's been catatonic, and he kills the clown at the facility at the insane asylum, and steals his makeup and his car and drives away, and then begins his murderous rampage by poisoning drugs. I'm telling you, if Batman finds out that this guy was there, all the clues are there. How could you miss him? He's escaped from the asylum. Okay, so we're aware of that. The clown is dead. Oh, I see. And the clown's car is gone. Oh, I see. Which is really easy to spot because it says Fabo the Clown on it. And this guy has been catatonic for 10 plus years and in prison for like 13. So wherever he lands, he's going to feel awkward because the world does change after 10 or 12 years. And people are going to recognize him. And if he's out of his clown makeup, well, somewhere he stopped to wipe that off. And then they've also got photos of him as he is as a prisoner without the clown makeup. How hard is it to track this guy down? And I'm telling you, Batman in issue 3, this guy would be done. So there'd be nothing left. And the thing is, I think Nighthawk, from what I've read in Supreme Power and Squadron Supreme, he would be there too. He would have figured this out right away. Instead, he's so ineffective, which is kind of, frustrating because he's proven himself in some of these other issues to be far more effective. This one here, he's captured by this clown fellow, because he goes into a room and, the sight is so bad that he throws up. Says, but I didn't recognize, even with my heat sensor goggles, that, darn, the clown is hiding behind the door with a noxious spray to almost kill me. Man, I should have known that. Yeah. You should have. And you would have if you were the Nighthawk from Supreme Power and Squadron Supreme. So the clown is given far too much leeway into how he gets gets these jobs done, his crimes committed, and all of his poisons on the street. Is it just far too lenient? He's got nothing on the Joker. It's just all falls into his lap, and it just. He's not an interesting villain in that respect. And there's so many changes about his villain. I mean, in the early time he's catatonic, and by the end of it he's talking, and he's throwing back the, you complete me, we're two sides. That works for Batman and the Joker. It doesn't work at all for these two. And it's just like you're trying to force that that dynamic by having this guy as a clown and this guy being the representative of Batman. But it doesn't work just because you're dressed up that way. Okay? And it doesn't ring true that this guy would even say, you complete me, and all that sort of stuff. So I was disappointed. I mean, as a standalone series, and this is nice homage to Amazing Spider-Man 151. As a standalone series, it has nothing to do with Supreme Power Squadron Supreme. You at least with the Joe Ledger, you get some of the connection there, and with Hyperion, there is the connective tissue between the two series. This has absolutely nothing to do with it. It's just a Nighthawk adventure, which I would be happy with, and I would be happy to read more Nighthawk adventures if he was the Nighthawk that I knew from Supreme Power and Squadron Supreme. This is a really poor version of Nighthawk. I'm not going to recommend the read. You're better off to read a better Batman and Joker story. The only thing is that I would read it because there's not a lot of Nighthawk material out there, not this particular character, and I think this is an interesting character. And unfortunately, this is like, I know there's another one coming up in the future, but from this time period, this is the only Nighthawk solo story there is. Again, there's no spec and there's no investment on any of these books, and for collector reason, the Supreme Power of Nighthawk, and and that's about it. So overall, what do I think? Well, definitely reading the Squadron Supreme if you're a fan of the Supreme Power. The three miniseries, the Doctor Spectrum and the Hyperion, again add a little bit more so the Hyperion to the Supreme Power storyline. So if you want to read more into them, get more depth, there's that. And Nighthawk, it's not really a very good story. I like the artwork by Steve Dillon, no doubt about that. But I don't think it shows Nighthawk at its best. But there's very little Nighthawk stories out there, so this, for just reading for that purpose, maybe you want to read it for that. Cost wise, all of this stuff is dollar bin material. So happy hunting, and until then, be good to yourself and be good to others. And, we'll talk again soon. And when we talk again soon, I do have some more stuff to talk about Supreme Power when it goes into Ultimate Power. And then they did all this strange stuff where some worlds collided and stuff, and I don't even know where that is. I have to read all of that sort of stuff and find out what happens. But so there'll be another one at some point in time. But until then, as I say, be good to yourself, be good to others, and we'll talk again soon.